Frankly, I have some bit of criticism of the way our police handled it, but let's put it in a perspective. I mean, Israel since '67 has kept the freedom of religion at Al-Aqsa Mosque, and with all the problems and the wars and the violence, this principle was kept really rigorously by all Israeli government. The problem is that there are forces, and mainly Hamas at the time, which try to use this sacred place, sacred to both Jews and Muslims, to spark another wave of violence in the region. And the violence you saw 2 days ago at Al-Aqsa Mosque really resulted from the fact that some 300 people went into the mosque armed with clubs and stones and what have you. And I don't think most people go that way to a synagogue or to a mosque or to a church. So the police had to react. And as I said at the beginning, it reacted a bit harshly than necessary. But
that's the very point, isn't it? They went in more harshly than is necessary. And now we're in the situation that we're in, which is escalation.
Look, if we're starting again the blame game, who started what, fine. All I'm saying is look at the broad picture. The broad picture is that every Friday, tens of thousands, if not more, Muslim worshippers go to Temple Mount and pray and go back. We had a problem there. As I said, it resulted from a group of people who came there to start a trouble, not to pray. And we had to handle it.
We handled it.
Okay, Nora, let's jump in there.
I don't want to get into a tit for tat about what happened, but really, I think sticking to facts is extremely important. The Israeli police has no business and no right being inside Al-Aqsa. It has no business restricting Palestinians and deciding who can enter the Al-Aqsa Mosque and for how long. And the fact is, there is a tradition, a religious tradition, to stay at Al-Aqsa, to stay overnight at Al-Aqsa, praying and introspection. And Israel wanted to restrict that, wanted to stop that, ban that. So the fact that some Palestinians may have been, apprehensive about a possible clash with the Israeli security forces, with the Israeli occupation forces, is not because they were looking for trouble, is because they knew it was going to happen, because Israel had been raiding Al-Aqsa for days. This was no surprise. This is the modus operandi of the occupation. And to say that Israel has respected religious freedom is really, and I want to stay respectful here, and I don't want to gear off point, but that's just factually incorrect. And all international reports refute that. When you restrict, when you say that Palestinians under 30 or 45 cannot go to Jerusalem, you are restricting the right to freedom of religion. When you decide who can enter and who cannot, when you ban people from Al-Aqsa and from the old city, then you're not respecting the right to freedom of religion. You're not respecting their human rights.
I'm going to jump in there, Noor. I want to move on. We haven't yet heard from Francesca Albanese, who's the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories. Francesca, what's your sense of where we're at now, the overall situation? How serious is it?
I think it's very serious, but let me add on what the other speakers were saying. I think that Israel's recent attacks on Al-Aqsa were reckless and beyond violating the basic human rights of the Palestinians, including the rights to worship and causing damage to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They violate the status quo agreement, which Israel is under obligation to respect. And in this sense, yes, there is no reason for the police to go in. And so these attacks are neither unprecedented nor nor isolated. I agree with Israeli speakers that the context matters, and the context is that of an abusive occupation which operates outside what is permitted by international law. So it's not a tit for tat. It's not something that started this week, this year, or even in 2022 or in 2021. It's a reality where the Palestinians endure confinement, land confiscations, home demolitions, discriminatory law enforcement, mass incarceration, and other countless abuses and indignities and humiliations. So the violence is only doomed to continue unless this irredeemable illegality is fixed.
No, I just want to unpick it a bit, because we have this thing. Just very quickly, come back to that very quickly. Yeah.
Very quickly, if Francesca agrees with me about the context, let's broaden it a bit further and say that we came up with the Oslo initiative, which might have finished the occupation, and the Palestinians said no. So, and now they are victimizing themselves forever. So this is where we are.
Okay, I just wanted to get it back to what's happened in the last few days. I want to unpick that.
Yeah, but just one point, because the right to self-determination cannot be infringed. Yeah.
I'm going to come back to you in a second. You'll have plenty of opportunity to talk. But no, so Thursday we have the Israeli military once again attacking worshippers in Al-Aqsa. And then we have dozens of rockets being fired in from Lebanon into Israeli territory, biggest escalation since 2006. For our audience, tell us about who fired those rockets and why from Lebanon.
Well, we don't know who fired the rockets. There have been no claims of responsibility as far as I know. Israel accused Hamas, even though Hamas is not based in Lebanon, and it responded by bombarding the Gaza Strip, which it's still considered an occupying power of. It is a land that is besieged by Israel since 2006, and it also bombarded southern Lebanon. The idea that an escalation, that these scenes of brutality can happen in Jerusalem while Palestinians look on, while people see that there is this entrenched culture of impunity, of no consequence, is absurd. Israel continues to insist that it can do whatever it wants in Jerusalem, and it expects Palestinians everywhere else to be quiet and mute. And that has proven folly. And as Francesca said, while this brutality continues, it is unrealistic to expect Palestinians not to respond. So we saw that escalation in southern Lebanon. I don't think there is any verifiable way to know who fired the rockets. And I don't think it really matters because it is obvious from the way Israel reacted that there is nobody seeking an all-out confrontation. The easiest target for Israel is the Palestinians. It can target them and brutalize them without any consequence, without getting any regional actors involved. And so it has done that, and it will continue to do that as long as it can get away with it. That's just the brutal reality of it. And the easy fix
for those who may not know
ending
about
that occupation, Oslo or not.
All right. Francesca, for those who don't know the history, how does Hezbollah fit into the picture? And they may not have been responsible for these rocket attacks, but they would have known about it, right?
Yeah, just one point to answer briefly the question before.
Sure.
Whatever the agreements cannot infringe the right of self-determination of any people, including the Palestinians. And now, let's say previous violence unleashed against the Palestinians at Al-Aqsa in 2021-2022 have caused tensions with military groups in Gaza. Now the situation is worse because there have been indiscriminate attacks launched by southern Lebanon as well, the largest attack from Lebanon since 2006. I cannot say who was behind it, but I condemned all attacks on civilians. Civilians must be protected, and there are principles of proportionality and distinctions that are cardinal and intransgressible in international law. But again, the context is that of an escalation that was predictable, and Israel had the means not to trigger it. And this is a question that we should all reflect upon. The asymmetry of power between Israel and Palestinian groups should also be considered. I mean, when we talk about the indiscriminate attacks against the civilians, the occupation is the trigger to this violence, and it's not an occupation maintained for security reasons. I'm sorry. Otherwise, why would have it translated into the creation of over 270 colonies in the occupied land and the transfer or over 720,000 Israeli civilians? This is what we should be talking about, because this is the trigger of the violence with the Palestinians.
Uri, do you want to come back to that? This is the trigger that inevitably the resistance is going to come if the Palestinians are treated in this way.
Well, the difference between the way Israel defends itself and the way the Palestinians feel they are defending their cause is that Israel goes out of its way not to hit civilians, and I can tell you, as a former Air Force colonel, that many times when pilots or people who operate unmanned vehicles, they stop, they don't launch the missile or something because some uninvolved people are around. On the contrary, what we saw today in the West Bank is some Palestinians killing brutally and intentionally two sisters and critically wounding their mother. And I didn't hear anything from the other two speakers about this. So that's the difference. I mean, we try.
My question to you, Uri, was more about the trigger for all this violence, one way or the other. It comes down to the root cause, which is the occupation.
The continuation of the occupation is a result of the continuous rejectionism of Palestinians to any peace settlement. And we came up with the Oslo Accords and with Camp David in 2000, and still they keep saying no and no. And this is what happens. Frankly, personally, I'm not for settling the West Bank with Jews. I would rather stay in Israel proper. But when you have on the other side a partner which even doesn't take yes for an answer, it's a problem.
I mean, where do I begin? But let me just remind the viewers, because there's been so much hasbara in the past few minutes, that Israel has killed thousands of Palestinian civilians. It has destroyed entire residential buildings. It has targeted the press. It has downed an entire building housing Al Jazeera and AP in Gaza. It killed our colleague and friend Shireen Abu Akleh in Jenin. So when we're talking about the Israeli army, let's keep that in perspective. The plethora of evidence about targeting civilians, about wiping entire families off the population registry are abundant, and they can be found very easily. They're readily available. To say that Palestinians reject freedom and self-determination, and that's why Israel must occupy them, is an old line. It seems that some think that it doesn't get old, but it really is old and used, and it's also nonsensical. The Palestinian right to be free of Israeli domination, of Israeli brutalization is absolute. And to excuse the commission of war crimes, which is what building settlements and transferring the occupiers' population is, it is simply laughable. Israel could end its occupation if it were interested, but you have a government now that is committed to not just decimating the Palestinian people, but to treating the entirety of historic Palestine as the land of Israel, to denying the existence of the Palestinian people, to denying their very own humanity. You have ministers who are responsible for controlling the lives of Palestinians who have been convicted even in Israel, for being provocateurs, for attacking Israeli security, for attacking Palestinians. And they're inviting a lot of these pogroms and a lot of these attacks by Israeli settlers against Palestinian civilians and by Israeli occupation authorities against Palestinian civilians. This is not a case of Palestinians who want to remain occupied so they can remain violent. That's a very racist idea to present, quite frankly. The continuation of the occupation.
Let's move it on. Let's move it on. Francesca, the bottom line is little's going to change without a massive international effort. Francesca, what do you make of the response to the Al-Aqsa provocations? The Canadian Prime Minister calling on Israel to shift its approach from the violent scene at Al-Aqsa, but there was little else, really. Would you call for more international condemnation, and what more needs to be done for, say, the United States?
Yes, it's clear that mere words of condemnation do not work. Do not work anywhere, particularly here, where, again, I want to stress for the viewers that the relationship is not a symmetrical one between two equal entities or countries. There is one people and one state occupying another, with a significant asymmetry of forces and power in coming into play. Instead of acquiescing to these state of affairs and calling for negotiations between the occupier and the occupied, the international community should simply abide by international law, and so do not recognize the illicit act, the internationally wrongful act committed by Israel, and do not cooperate or extend recognition of the colonization of the occupied territory, and also ask for cessation and reparations for this illegal act. But also in the current reality, it's absolutely necessary to deploy a protective presence that guarantees the safety and security of all civilians. First and foremost, the Palestinians, because they are the most exposed to the violence, but also the Israelis. But again, this should lead as a long-term solution to the dismantlement of the occupation and the dismantlement of the colonization that Israel maintains over the occupied territory, because this is not in line with international law.
Uri, I want to come back to Noor's point about the current government, and it's fair to say, isn't it, that the right-wing elements, they do nothing to reduce tensions, like the ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir?